afternoon. Thank you for joining me here. So today we are running an introduction to prompt engineering for marketers. This is going to be an introductory event based around how you as a marketer can get better results from your AI. Now we are seeing some massive benefits by marketers and from marketing agencies using AI, baking it into their processes and streamlining the quality and the consistency that they're generating. So there's still a lot of people though who aren't using AI either to its full potential or who have tried it in the past and weren't happy with the consistency, weren't happy with their output. So today I'm going to talk you through step by step the basics of how to do prompt engineering so you can start to apply it in your role. So there's a number of things we're going to give you an overview of today. We'll probably be here about 45 minutes or so, and hopefully you'll find it useful. If you don't know who I am, my name is Dan Thomas. I run a company called Architect, and I'm also senior technologist at a company called Lima Logic. So if after this you think, yep, I'm looking, maybe we should be automating some of this, maybe we should be looking at more technical aspects of how we are using AI in our business, do give me a shout, and at Lima we can have a chat with you about setting that up. So let's get into it then, because it is after 12 and we are good to go. So the core of what I'm going to be talking about later on in this is the FIYRD framework. So this is a framework I developed as a result of running courses together with the Isle of Man government on how to use AI and prompt engineering. I realized I needed a standardized framework that I could explain to people how we do prompting and how I was doing prompt engineering. So I came up with the FIYRD framework, and this is now available for free. So I've released V2 with it. If you follow this QR code on your screen, that will take you to a place you can just sign up and download it for free. It's about 6,500 words, breaks down exactly how to use the framework, how to structure your prompts, how to ensure the consistency of your output is there as well. And yeah, we'll talk about it during this as well and give you an overview of it, but that is where you go to get the most detailed version of it. Now, one thing I would say is when you look at prompt engineering, it's not necessarily about the standalone prompts. A lot of tools now, things like ChatGPT, have a prompt optimizer as part of it. So you can click a button and it will just tidy up your prompt a bit. It will make it more structured. What we're really looking for, though, is process management. It's consistency of process so that every time you do a prompt, every time you go through that, you are getting that more consistent output from it. Particularly if you're a business, if you're doing this professionally, it's no good saying, well, last week I used the prompt and got this incredible outcome. Today I used it another 20 times, it was rubbish. Or if you're trying to do something and you have to iterate it loads and loads of times to get the desired outcome, that doesn't work when you're a business because it's still too much time you're losing. So having a framework in place will help establish that, and we'll discuss that more in a few minutes. Excuse me. So to begin with, we are going to break down some of the key information you need to know about in order to use these tools effectively. Now, I want to be clear here, you don't need to know how to build AI tools. You don't need to know the technical mathematics behind how diffusion models work and all that sort of thing. But knowing that they exist and knowing why they are there is useful to you when you come to actually building your prompts and when you come to using the tools. So to start with, it's important to understand the difference between what we term modern AI, or what we term as AI now often, versus what a lot of more computer programmers and things like that will term as AI. So in effect, we're looking at LLMs and associated services versus big data. So big data is not new, it's been around decades, and it's about analyzing massive data sets to identify trends and correlations and predictions. So very key for business, been around a long time. Now, when we take that into, I suppose, more classical AI, you would call it, It's AI and machine learning. So it's systems that learn patterns from data. So you can feed them in vast volumes of data and they will look at the patterns within that. But they don't necessarily have to be programmed, they actually learn from that data. Now, in comparison, LLMs and generative AI are very new. So we've really been around for, in a practical, widely accepted form for 2.5 years now, since ChatGPT launched. There have been older versions of them and there have been attempts earlier, but that was really when it went mainstream. Now, for most people, and for the sake of this course, when we refer to AI, that's what we're referring to. It's not the technical data and data analysis side necessarily, it's the ability of these tools to communicate with us. And that's where generative AI is. It's about creating new content, such as text, images, music and audio, or video, rather than just analyzing the data. Now, the advantage of these is that we've taken computers, and before we would have to learn their language. So if you wanted data analysis, you would hire a specialist developer who could write Python scripts off and something like that, and would analyze the data for you and give you the result back. What's happened though is we've taught the machines to speak our language. We've taught them to communicate in the way we communicate rather than us communicating in their language. This means it's democratized access. So you can now communicate via LLMs with this data, and get an easier understanding of it. There are issues around that though. But LLMs themselves are models trained on a huge volume of text, talking billions and billions of sets of text, so that they can then predict word patterns for you. So if we're talking about text, and they really are prediction engines. Now, what they do is they predict the next word in a sequence in order to, or with a contextual awareness based on the information they have and the information you've given them, to be able to generate human-like or human understandable responses rather than just spitting out code or pure data. So the key distinction really is that big data explains what has happened. LLMs are a communication tool though. They help you communicate, they help the machines communicate with you, and they help you ideate and create new things. So our focus in this for marketers is about the LLM side. I'm not suggesting you go off and become data analyst or anything like that. It's about how you use these tools to get the right response for you and to get quality in those responses. So one of the things, and I've seen this confusion with people several times because of the way these solutions are packaged to the end user, is that text and image generation are two very separate things. And again, it's not necessarily something where I'm saying you need to go down and figure out how they work and understand the technical aspect of it, but it's useful to know that they are two separate systems. So the first is text generation. Things like, these are your large language models, things like ChatGPT and Gemini. So these again, they say they're trained on a huge amount of text and they predict the probability of the next word in a given sequence. Now they use tokens to do this, and a token is, and you'll see this phrase a lot about pricing via token in these models. And a token isn't necessarily a word, it's a word or a piece of a word. So when you ask one of these tools to generate something, they will select one token at a time based on probabilities and to build out a coherent text sequentially for you. Now, this is one of the reasons in the past we've seen a lot higher volume of hallucinations in models, particularly when they first launched. This is because if you said to it, I want a source that matches this format, they weren't necessarily trying to go off and do research for it. They're doing probability word matching. So they were generating things that matched the string they were expecting. They weren't necessarily going off and doing some work. And again, it's this thing of these tools don't think like you or I would think. They are machines, and having this understanding of how it's actually doing it is really vital. One of the ways I describe these in my talks is that if anyone remembers the old mobile phones with the physical keypads, when you used to type in words and it would predict the word based on which number you were pressing, because each number had 3 or 4 letters on it, and it would guess from the combination what word it could be. And after a while, it started predicting what sentence you were doing. This is really an advanced version of that. Now, this is matched with these things understand context a lot better. They use something called transformer-based neural networks, where they capture the context and the relationships between words. So there is a deeper understanding to it. So when it's doing these things, it has that contextual awareness. So essentially, it's a very advanced next word predictor to generate human-like text based on your context. So when we talk about the FIYRD framework in a few minutes, we're going to talk more about that context and building the right context. Now, image generation is quite different. Image generation is things, well, diffusion models like DALL-E, which ChatGPT uses, Stable Diffusion, Midjourney. In essence, they start, well, the way they are trained is they are trained similar to the way LLMs are trained with text, they are trained with images. They then gradually add noise to that image until it's just a block of noise. To actually generate an image then, the model starts with pure random noise, and a network or a system designed to denoise an image towards your answer or what you want is then applied to it. So imagine in this case, I've used the TV scene with static on. Imagine that static gradually being removed to create whatever image you wanted. So it translates the text into something it knows you need contextually, and then starts to remove that noise from the image to generate, or from the initial image to generate the overall image. So again, very different to how a person would generate an image. None of us would sit there by doing something, starting off with sheets of covered in noise and just removing bits. We start from blank and build up, but these models start from noise and filter down. So two very, very different systems. The reason there's confusion about how they work is primarily because models like ChatGPT and Gemini have image generation built into their UI. It's not like you have to go to a separate tool to do it. And that leads people to think, well, they're the same thing. It's just one tool. And particularly if you're looking at prompt engineering in your marketing, this is quite an important concept to understand. That a lot of tools are not necessarily a single tool. So we've seen an awful lot of AI tools appear recently for doing certain things like posting to social media, generating blog post images, all this kind of function. Now, they're not necessarily a tool in itself. They are something built on top of another tool. So a lot of them will be ChatGPT, for instance, in the back end. And what they are doing is they're using the prompt engineering or they're doing the prompt engineering for you. So you're putting in an instruction saying a picture of a dog riding a bike, whatever it is. They are then adding prompts in the back end, depending on what you've selected, to actually tailor the output for you. And then they are sent, so you're putting your prompt in, they're adding their prompt to it, and then they're sending that to the underlying model. So when it's important you understand this, because that can change how effective your prompting is. So if you're brand new to it and you're using one of these third-party tools, great, they are very good to get you started, and they will often refine it down what you're doing. But if you want to do proper prompt engineering where you have this fine-tuned control yourself, you need to get as close to the base AI solution as possible, so you can be sure that as little is happening to your prompts and they are being sent to the model in the way you want rather than being edited in the back end. Now, there's always a question of when to use and not when to use, or when to not use AI, sorry. So at Lima Logic, if you have a look at the Lima Logic page on here, you will see there is the grind framework on there at the minute, which is a more detailed version of how to decide where you should be using AI. In essence, I often normally go for the things that I don't like or things that take too long. Now, one thing I would say is be wary of embedding AI into your personal life. So I use it very much as a business tool. I very rarely use it outside my business. And the reason behind that is because a business is about making money. It's cost versus income. It's how long do things take versus how much money does that make. So for aspects like that, AI is a great tool. It's very, very powerful. It can cut down timescales and make anyone a lot more efficient and improve their output. What I do see though is a lot of people use AI outside of work in their personal lives. And again, sometimes very beneficial if there's tasks you don't like doing. I mean, unfortunately, I haven't got an AI yet that will load the dishwasher for me. But if there's something where I'm traveling somewhere and I just need to know some details, great for that sort of thing. On the other hand, I read stories to my kids at night. I could have an AI tool that does that for me. And yes, it would probably give me 20 minutes of my time back. But that's not really where I want to be using it. There is something to be said for a level of friction in your personal life and a level of challenge and the benefits that gives you. It's all a bit philosophical, but the old phrase, it's not the destination, it's the journey. Well, in a company, it's about the destination. It's about the money at the end of it. In your personal life, you have to make an assessment as to whether or not you want to be using AI. But in a business, there is still a choice of whether or not to use it. There are ethical decisions to make. This is something you'd have to decide for your business. Ethically, do we want to be using AI at this point or this point? Do we want to be using AI-generated posts on our social media? If we are using them, do we flag it as that? How much are we happy using the AI to communicate with our staff or our consumers? Are you happy using AI to respond to emails that have come in from clients and things like that? It's all these aspects of it where you have to make those decisions. But in essence, AI is great at the ideation stage of things. So brainstorming, campaign themes, for example, helping you build audience personas. And there's great GPT we're building at Lima Logic that Natalie's built just around that, about just helping you build out audience personas. Content creation, again, there's a side of how far do you want to go down with it, but creating long form blogs, ad copy, product visuals, product descriptions, these sort of things, you might not necessarily want the AI to generate the end product and the end output, but you can use it throughout the process to help you streamline it, make it more consistent, and just improve that quality overall. One of the key uses for AI is personalization at scale. Tailoring your messaging for micro segments. If you're doing an email list and you've got 5,000 people and you've actually got 10, say, different segments, sitting and tailoring an email with tweaking the language, tweaking and refining it for those different segments can be very time consuming. If you've got the framework in place and you've got the structure in place, it becomes much easier that perhaps you could write the core email and then you could have the AI just update the terminology slightly depending on the specific audience. Workflow acceleration, very useful for it. So first drafts, internal documents, creative exploration, just that brainstorming side, very, very powerful for that, very useful. And particularly in small teams. So if you're in a larger team, well, I've worked in some pretty big marketing teams. I've led a couple of ones of a reasonable size. And there's a challenge in it that you all sit in a meeting together and everyone has ideas and the meetings take 3 or 4 hours. And that's everyone's time used up. So AI in that case gives you the option to say, well, actually, one or two people can brainstorm with the AI and then present a more rounded view to the rest of the team. If you're a solo marketer, if it's perhaps you're doing marketing for your own business, or you're in a role where there just isn't the support, having an AI tool there and knowing how to use it correctly can give you almost a second set of eyes on it. Again, you have to be careful with these that they do tend to be overly helpful, should we say at times, but you can use them very effectively for that. And there are a few times though where I would say it's probably not suitable to using an AI. Things like formal legal or final copies of legal text, for example, very highly regulated spaces may not want to use it, or anything where you are putting sensitive personal data in there, particularly compliant or GDPR data, which we'll talk about next. Anytime you're using that, you have to be very careful about using AI. So overall, it's about accelerating and amplifying what you're doing. I very much go for the human-led AI enhanced approach. That's when I do the courses and I'm running events or I'm doing training in the house for people. That's my basis. It's not a let's replace your staff with AI. It's a how can we use the AI to make your staff better at their jobs, make their lives easier. And linked to that, actually, I used to have conversations with copywriters who swore they wouldn't use AI because they enjoyed writing. It's like, well, I cut my teeth as a copywriter for several years and I enjoy writing. I still do a lot of writing. I actually write by hand in a notebook, a lot of my first drafts. And I'm not necessarily going to use AI for that. But there are aspects to it where I will use AI when I'm reviewing things. If I've handwritten text and I want to get it into the computer, I won't necessarily sit and type it out. I can take a photo of it and put it in. And same with graphic designers. There are some aspects to the job they might really enjoy and they don't want to use AI for. But there might be some aspects which they don't. And again, that's a business decision you have to make, though. I would never suggest, for example, that we all start going out and buying AI art to look nice. Or that if you're an artist and you paint for the joy of it, instead of getting out the watercolors at the weekend, you go, no, I'm going to use AI to generate a watercolor picture. Because if it's something you're doing for the sake of enjoying it, it comes back to this idea of are you using AI in your business versus your personal life? If you enjoy it, I'm not saying you should use AI for it. What I'm saying is if it's a business task, there is always a case to be said for, does it make it faster? Does it make the quality better? Will it bring in more money? So, oops, jumped ahead a bit too much there. Compliance and GDPR. Preface, I am not a lawyer. I would recommend that anytime you are looking at compliance and GDPR, you talk to specialists about it. So one of the big problems at the minute companies are facing is shadow AI. So this is where people in a business are using AI tools and they're not authorized to use them. They've not been trained on them. They are under the table usage. Now, they will often be seeing major benefits to that individually. So their work might be getting better quality. They'll be able to do a lot more of it. There is perhaps a case for certain execs deliberately ignoring the issues of shadow AI because regulation hasn't affected them yet. And at the same time, the teams are doing very well. The teams are getting better results. But first thing I would say is anything with compliance, GDPR, if you are in a business using AI tools, check with your compliance team, check with your IT team, make sure that the tool you are using is fully authorized, you know exactly how you can use it and can't use it, and all that aspect of it. Because the last thing you want to do is be using a tool because it's out there, it's on the internet, it's free or it's very cheap. It saves you loads of time. The boss thinks you're the best thing ever because you've done all this stuff and you're working at such a faster pace, only to get marched out the office 1 week and fired because you've breached one of these. So there's a few recommendations I normally make around compliance and GDPR. First is human in the loop. You always want to make sure that during these processes and during any AI process, there is humans available and humans structured as part of that, both to act as a second set of eyes and to validate the content or the output that's been generated, but also to act as a fire break and say, actually, we can stop this. If it goes wrong, we can put a stop to this. Now, as we move, the world moves towards full agentic AI, which is AI tools that have more power and more access to actually complete tasks rather than just giving information. This is going to become more of an issue. I say at Lima Logic, we do a lot around automation. We help companies with automating processes. And human in the loop is key in there. It's what points do we want to put people into this to ensure that it's not going to go wrong. There are other automation solutions out there and agencies I've seen who don't really apply that. They're pushing for it saves the time and it saves the money. Whereas my approach is very much, you need humans there and you can't fully write them out because there's just too much risks. Data minimization, same as with any software tool, you only want to be putting the data in you have to put in it. And again, GDPR, big issue, don't be putting customer PII into these tools unless you are 100% sure you can do it. I've heard of instances where people are using open public tools and putting customer data in there because they've heard that maybe it's GDPR compliant. Now, a lot of these tools can be configured to be compliant, but there's a process behind that, and you have to make sure it's in place and done properly. Again, bias and fairness, you need to be aware of things in your output that could be enhancing bias or could be pushing a biased approach on things. Again, this normally comes through the training data. So if you're a marketer and you have trained your tool, for example, on, let's say you've used using ChatGPT, you've trained your personal GPT on your previous content. Now, if there's some biases in there, potentially because that content was created for a specific client, potentially for other reasons, you will find it comes through in the new one. Now, this is another linked issue with this, that when we talk about the FIYRD framework, we'll break down a bit more how to deal with it. But these tools often have memory now. They have that wider contextual memory of the conversations you have had in the past. Now, the risk of this, and I've seen this happen with someone I worked with, is they were using it to help them structure a technical piece of content. And halfway through the technical piece of content was some information which I knew the product didn't do. It turned out they were working with a separate client, which was fine. They were a marketer, they had multiple clients, we had no problem with that. But when they had generated this piece, it had found this in their conversation history and assumed it was part of it. So they were pushing out content that was technically inaccurate and stated that this software could do something it didn't. So you have to be aware of how your training data is going in there. So I'm not going to go into the GDPR obligations, but make sure you're aware of them. And if you're in a business, make sure that you have full GDPR authorization to do these things. Just in case you're not aware, there are 2 tiers of fines in the GDPR, depending on severity. So the first one is up to, and this is the lower fine, is up to 10 million euros or 2% of annual global turnover, whichever is higher. So we're not talking pocket change here if you get hit with the GDPR breach. The second one is up to 20 million or 4% of annual global turnover. So lower tier fines are normally around things like failures in record keeping, not notifying of data breaches and that sort of thing. And then obviously there's higher tiers ones, things like violating subject rights, for example, the right to access, erasure, portability. Now that one I mentioned in particular because with AI tools, that's a key aspect of how they work, of how you need to be aware they work with GDPR. So I'm not saying you need to be a GDPR compliance expert by any stretch. As a marketer, that's outside your remit probably, but you have to have an awareness of it. You have to know what things you need to watch out for are, and if in doubt, go speak to the spec, or even before there's doubt, go speak to the specialist in your company, make sure that they are happy with the tool you're using, that it has compliance for everything they need. So before we jump into the FIYRD framework and run through that, why do you need a framework at all? After all, these things are very user-friendly. We can all sit there. My 75-ish-year-old mum can sit there and use ChatGPT, no problem. Well, that's fine for most people. And if you're using it as a curiosity, as a bit of a novelty, that's fine. Because you can sit there and you can play with it. And one time you get decent quality, another time you get rubbish quality, sometimes you get something in the middle, but you're just playing with it. There's not a business requirement there. As soon as this becomes a business requirement for you to do it effectively, consistency is vital. So consistency not only in the quality of the output, but enabling you to be consistent in all your marketing. So for example, having a consistency in your tone and style, having your brand guidelines consistently applied to whatever marketing you're putting out. It's also about efficiency. I say businesses are about making money, much as businesses all say, though, we're a family and all this fluffy noise. A business is about making money. The more profitable you can be to a business, the better your chances of keeping your job and working there. And again, it's partially the cynic in me, but that's what you need to be focused on. So having frameworks gives you that repeatable structures, which can save you time and help you ensure that business consistency, that business quality, and the ROI. Quality control, again, it's one of those things where having that framework means everyone's acting consistently and you're all getting that same quality out. If you've got a team of half a dozen people, for example, I once was chief copywriter for a team of about 5 people, and everyone has different styles of writing. Now, the more professional a copywriter you are, the more your style becomes irrelevant, and it is about the business style. But particularly when people are learning copywriting and developing their skills in it, their style tends to be more focused on their own. And as the lead copywriter, I had to then shoehorn that back together into the business style. Having a framework for how you're communicating with these tools, how you're structuring it, how you're using them to help you create content or review your content means you can get that sort of quality control embedded in your processes. And scalability again, because one or two people using it, great. If you need to scale up, frameworks and processes are key of that. If you go from having a marketing team of 2 people to having a marketing team of 20, how do you get all those 18 additional people all using the same process, all doing the same? You have it written down, you have it structured, and you have it clear. And finally, the governance side. Again, having some sort of framework in place and governance frameworks lets you make sure you're doing that compliant, safe use. But in the terms of the FIYRD framework, we're going to be talking about the actual prompt engineering framework itself. So a core framework for how you do it. And we will jump into that now. So this is the very brief overview of the FIYRD framework. I say this is actually V2 of it. V1 was released in October last year, so that's October 2024. And V2 was released a couple of weeks ago. So the actual framework, the core framework hasn't changed, but the way we structure the prompts within the framework has. Now, again, I've put the QR code on the screen so you can go and get your free download of this. I would recommend you do that because it's going to go into a lot more detail than I can do in the next 15, 20 minutes. But the framework here gives you this sort of overview of how to use it. Or sorry, we're going to give you an overview of how to use it, and walk you through it, and particularly the JSON aspect of it, because this is something I've been working on a lot recently. And to remove the ambiguity from your prompting and to make sure the machine or the tool that you're using gives you exactly what you want. And again, when we talk about this consistency, it's not just about being consistent with one thing. It's about saying, well, actually, now we want to make a minor change. So let's say you had an image and the person had glasses on, and you want to be able to make the change and say, well, actually, I want exactly the same image, but I don't want them to have glasses on. or I want a different color scheme, or I want to change this the hex code of this color to a different hex code, and make those very minor changes, which as a person you would do no problem, whatever you're in Photoshop or graphic design software, or if you're writing in a Google Doc and you want to make very minor changes, it's easy to do that. When you're using these tools, it can be more challenging, and this is the process that lets you do that. So the first part of it is the flattening prompt. So this is your reset button. So it clears all the hidden context, so you start fresh. Depending on the tool you are using and depending how you've got it set up will depend how much you have to do this. So what's happening now is the tools have a more wider understanding of them. They can remember previous conversations, they can remember other things you've discussed. If you're using it for an individual business and an individual project, you might not need to do the flattening because all your context and all that wider context the model, your version of the model has, is about that one area. If though you're a marketing team and you have multiple clients, as I do when I run marketing products, I might have 7 or 8 clients. I really don't want information from client A going into client B's and so on, and that cross-contamination. As I mentioned, I have seen this happen where stuff's been pulled from the wrong place and gone into it. So a flattening prompt might be something as simple as forget all previous instructions to this point. So for example, I normally write in British English. I normally use UK structures. I'm talking about a particular theme. I'm often talking about AI or blockchain in my case as well. Let's say I'm working with a client and it's something completely different. They're in the US and they're a dentist. I don't want any of that other information about AI or blockchain or all the rules I've embedded in it and I've told it over and over again to keep doing about using British English. So I might use a prompt at the start, say, forget everything to this point and start that clean sheet. In effect, the way I describe it is it's like a painter getting a new canvas, stretching the board out and painting it all white so they've got that clean canvas to work with. So again, very useful for preventing cross-contamination. You can also put key things that you always do in here. So if, for example, you're always writing British English and you want the tool to use British English, you might put that in as a standard part of your prompt. One thing I would say with the entire FIYRD framework is that the goal isn't that you write a prompt every single time for everything you're doing. If it's a repeatable task, you need to write the prompt once, test it and refine it, and then store it somewhere. So I have Google Sheets, I have Google Sheets and Google Docs with prompts in for particular scenarios, particularly the more complex ones and the ones that happen regularly where I can just copy and paste it across. I've tested it, I've refined it, I know it's going to work. And it's a front-loading process where you have to do that work up front, but once you've done it once, the process sits in place. So next we have the I am prompt, or I am part of the prompt. This tells the tool your role and perspective. So I am a senior editor and I need to review this content. I am a graphic designer and I need to know what the rules are around graphic design for this social media platform. All these sort of things that tells the tool the context of why it's doing it and who it's doing it for. So things like your goals, the audience, the sort of social platforms you want it to be on. So I am the graphics designer, I am the something, so that tool then can understand what it's doing and how it should output for you particularly. And a lot of the times these tools will be very verbose, they will run on and they will do too much and they'll try and be too helpful. For example, if you're doing some research with one, you're researching a particular market demographic, let's say, you might not want a long-winded 30-page discussion about this. You might just want a list of, in a JSON format, of certain key information resources. So you could say, I am a researcher and I need to know this, this, and this. So the I am just gives it that context. Now the you are is something that you'll have seen a lot if you spend any time on social media. There's lots of these sheets of the 101 greatest AI prompts to revolutionize your business kind of thing. They are largely this part of the FIYRD framework. So this is where you're assigning the AI tool its role. So you are a professional copywriter, you are a professional graphic designer, you are a something. Now, this is a good starting point. Because if you think of these AI tools of having access to all the information in the world and then trying to pattern match based on the instructions you're giving it, if you say you are a professional copywriter, rather than looking at all the writing out there in the world, it's going to say, well, actually, I'll look at those that I classified as professional copywriters. Now, the problem is that A, it's still very, very broad, and B, there are a lot of people in the world who are, I would term, paid amateurs. So they get paid, which technically makes them a professional, but they don't really know what they're doing. And again, these tools don't necessarily know that. They're looking at the wider context of your instruction. And even with a lot of these prompts, you will still get that very middle ground answer from it. So it's a starting point that we're going to refine in the next step. So it's a bit like finding the right freelancer. So you say, you know, I need a copywriter, but then you're going to go off and you're going to give them the particular instructions for how to do that. So it's a contextual thing to start narrowing the boundaries of how the tool is going to engage with you. Next is your rule set. Now, this is really where you're setting boundaries and guidelines for the tool as to how it's going to follow your instructions. For example, I have a rule set of, I think it's about 36 rules for headline writing. Now, I actually wrote that prior to AI releasing, and I used to give it to teams I was working with. Now, I can give this to an AI tool, though, and if I'm writing headlines, I can say, you are a professional headline writer, here are the rules you have to follow. And then it's narrowing down much closely or much tighter what it will actually talk about. So this is things like your tone, your length of content, your formatting, you know, your brand alignment, using colors, using British English, and all this sort of thing. And it really narrows down that quality of the output. Now, this is very good for if you are a professional already and know what you're doing, and you want to streamline what you're doing, you can take your rules and you can take your process and you can embed it into the rules in the FIYRD framework. You can then structure that as a full prompt and save it for use over and over again. So in my personal set, I have something for headline writing. So if I'm writing a long form article, I know there are certain points within the article I want subheadings. And I have a tool that I can then upload the article in and say, identify the key points that the headlines should be added within this article, give me 5 or 6 examples based on this rule set for it. And I've got that all pre-written, so I can just copy and paste it in, upload the document, and it will start to brainstorm those for me. So rule set's very important. You can also use the tools to generate rules. And if you are looking at your brand identity and brand control, this is very useful. So you might take a range of your existing content, some of the marketing you've put out, and particularly if you know that some marketing you've put out has been very successful, whereas some hasn't, you might say, well, actually, we'll just take the top 10% of our marketing, we'll feed that into the tool, and we'll say, generate a rule set based on these. You might feed in some of the other content and say, right, out of the rule set we've just generated, which of these or which rules haven't been followed with these? So there's a lot you can do with the rule set, very powerful, and you can really go into a lot of depth with it. I would recommend, particularly if you're doing anything on social media, that you build out rule sets for how you want your content to look. If you've been around a while, you'll have a stack of social media content, and you can go and look through and find which bits have engaged best with your audience. You can then use those to generate the rules, And even if the AI tool isn't writing the content, you can have it compare, say you've got some copywriters in-house, you can have them run it against that rule set using the AI tool. So they've written a social post and they put it in and they say, right, compare this to the rule set, which ones are applied, which ones aren't. And they can then make the decision as to whether they want to embed those further rules, whether to rewrite and so on with there. Key thing with this, it requires that human element of skill. It requires that understanding of what the rules should or shouldn't be. Finally, quite simply, we have the do this part. This is the precise instruction, the thing you actually want the tool to go and do. So it might be everything up till this point becomes part of your standard rule and that, or your standard prompt, and then this becomes a more flexible aspect. So you might have rule sets around your branding, your tone of voice, your style, your content output type, preferred type, and then you say, well, actually now write me a post for LinkedIn, write me a post for Twitter, or X as it is, sorry. All these sort of things where this bit becomes more flexible and the rest that you've built up till then can be more controlled. So that's the core of the FIYRD framework. I say if you jump on the QR code, you will be able to get the full version of it. But there is one more part, which is why I released the V2. And that's, not too far, this idea of the JSON prompts. Now, this is something I use all the time now. I very rarely talk to AI tools unless it's very quick, as I would talk to a person. Yes, they're great for that, but it gives contextual flexibility. You're relying on the AI tool, translating what you're saying into something it understands, and then translating it back to you. So the advantage of JSON is it's a very clear, structured approach to communication. The other advantage is it's human readable. So I know on the screen it looks like you would see computer code, but when you actually in practice, it's very easy to use this. And if you're doing a human-led AI enhanced approach where you've got people working together with the AI, this becomes a common language and a common framework they can use. So it's about storing your prompts and the specific instructions, your rules, in a clear, reusable format. So, and again, because it's readable by humans and the machines, you can very easily have that sort of human working with AI tools more seamlessly. Now, one of the key aspects of this is that you can go into a lot of detail in it and you can be very specific in a way that's hard to do conversationally. This means you get a lot of consistency in your output. So in the image you can see on screen, for example, I've got primary colors, electric blue. What the hex code is, I mean of that. This is actually for an image I did for another talk. So at what contextual points in the image, that color will get used. So in this case, the warm white is used for the human-centric aspects of that image. So if there's a person doing something on it, they will have that in certain areas, whereas if it's a robot, they might not. Now, this is a halfway between human language and machine language. So it's very, very structured, but it still requires the machine to understand the context. Now, one of the advantages of this, I say, is this is where you get the consistency from. This is where you get the consistency and the ability to very easily make minor changes. So for example, if I thought that hex code's a bit bright, I want something a bit darker, I can just change that and it will, and I can change the name of that row from electric blue to deep blue or whatever I wanted, and it will then update it accordingly. But there's none of the sort of going back into the prompt and seeing the long conversation that you often have back and forwards with them. Now, this is very useful for the scalability side as well. That, again, when you're upskilling other team members in using these, so if you're looking to generate a load of content and you think we're going to bring in an external copywriter or we're going to bring in an external graphic designer, rather than saying, if you've just been using an AI tool to do it, you have to go, well, here's the prompt I got, here's the output, can you try and figure out something that looks similar? And there's a lot of translation by them of trying to figure out what it is, and by the machine of trying to figure out what they mean. Something like this becomes a much clearer approach. Here's the prompt we use. Here's the structure. Here's the color scheme. Here's the text styling. Here's the language patterns. Here's the output rules. And having them in this clear thing means it's very easy just to hand them over. And if you scale up and start to automate your process, again, this clarity works very well with automation. Now, this in effect becomes your library of prompts. So again, in the actual full FIYRD framework, I talk more about the JSON side, how to write JSON prompts, how to get the AI tool to write them, how to test and use them, and all that side of things. But I would very heavily recommend you have a look at JSON. It's going to give you a lot cleaner output, a lot more quality output, a lot more consistency. And again, over time, it becomes this library of tools that you use more regularly. So we are at 12:50, and I think it is time to wrap up. So thanks very much for coming along. I say this has been a very brief overview. I've thrown an awful lot of information at you in the last 51 minutes. So thank you for being here. The framework itself, as I say, the full version, which is, it's a 6,500 word book, sort of ebook you can get. The link is there, you can download that for free, or you can always give me a shout, and I'm happy to talk to people about this side of things. I do also run in-house training for companies specifically around prompt engineering. That can be, it's not necessarily someone just for marketing, but I do it for marketing teams, as I've got quite an extensive background in that area. But I would say thank you very much for coming along. Good luck with it all. And if you do have any questions, feel free to give me a shout. Thanks very much.